A Smoothler wrote to us recently. I felt last year we didn't use the heating as much in light of the new high costs, yet we still got a nice bill. If one uses heating less and the rest of the tenants use more, is the final bill totaled by usage for the entire building and distributed equally according to square meters of the apartment? Is there any point of being cheap and using the heating this winter?
Well, to be honest, the quick answer is yes and no. There is no straightforward answer because some aspects of the bill that the Smoothler is referring to is distributed equally and others is by consumption. In this video, we will go into detail what is distributed how and what this bill actually includes, as it is more than just heating. So let's first clarify what the bill is that the Smoothler referred to. Most commonly, it's called the utility bill, which is a statement that you get from your landlord once a year, and that concludes all of the operating and maintenance costs of living in the apartment or house. In German, it is called Nebenkostenabrechnung, or more specifically, Betriebskostenabrechnung.
Now, the next very crucial question is, how do you pay for the utilities in Germany? Depending on where you come from, the way utilities are charged might be different to what you're used to. As an example, I originally come from Guatemala, and there our electrical meters and water meters are outside, like next to the house. So every month, there's someone that comes from the electricity company and the water company. They read the meters and leave in the mailbox your Rechnung, your invoice. And then you proceed to pay for the consumption that you had that month. However, in Germany, it does not work like that.
No, it works very differently. For one, because our meters are not outside. They're usually to be found in the basement of the entire apartment building or also of any house. And you are also not being asked to measure that monthly. No, you pay a fixed amount per month. And that is a prepayment, an estimate of your consumption throughout the month and the year. And to identify this part is the Nebenkosten, which is, if you look at your rent or your rental contract, you have the cold rent, the Kaltmiete, which is the actual payment for the living space, and the Warmmiete, which is the actual rent that leaves your bank account. And the gap in between is the Nebenkosten, the utilities. And this is the part that is an estimate of whatever you're going to consume.
The estimate is determined by either previous tenants that lived there before, and they already know more or less how much tenants usually consume, or based on averages in the whole country of how much one could consume. At the end of the day, the estimate is really an estimate. It's a guess of, I think this is going to be my monthly consumption of utilities.
Well, it's not your monthly consumption because for the Nebenkosten, the landlord determines how much you will have to pay every month.
Ah, there you go.
And because it's an estimate, of course, you as a tenant and also the landlord want to receive the proper cost of your consumption. And that's why once a year, they add all of the different consumption metrics that fall into this bill together and send you the Nebenkostenabrechnung, the utility bill. And depending on how much you consumed, if your prepayments through the rent were higher than your consumption, you actually get money back. And if you consumed more than your prepayments, you will have to pay extra money. So it can really go both ways.
Now, what costs are part of the utility bill in Germany? The most obvious are water and heating. However, the Nebenkostenabrechnung has a lot more
to offer. Yes, definitely. And mind you, heating, I would say in the majority of rental contracts is included in the utilities. However, not in all. In some, you also have to pay for the heating separate and it's not part of your rent. So the operating costs, officially in German called Betriebskosten, that can be added to your Nebenkosten, to your utilities bill, are actually legally fixed. And there are so many that we're not going to list them all, but here you can see an excerpt from our rental contract that lists all of the legal possibilities. Let's just call a few or name a few ones that are very likely to be added to your bill. So like we said, heating costs and heating maintenance, cold water supply and also the drainage, janitors or property management, in our case in the past also the cleaning of the staircase, building electricity, building insurance and the liability insurance for the building, the property tax, community antenna systems or distribution systems for broadband network, in our case in the past also cable TV, garbage removal and street cleaning, chimney cleaning, if you have an elevator, also the cost and maintenance for the elevator, possible garden maintenance, and other operating costs, which for example could be also the maintenance of the legally binding smoke detectors that every room needs to have.
I have to say, before actually doing the research for this video, I had no idea the Nebenkostenabrechnung had so many things. And as an example, in our past apartment, we had cable TV, which we paid for apparently every year. We never used. I think you asked the landlord if we could cancel that. However, she said, oh, the contract they had was for 10 years, already a fixed amount for the whole building, so it wasn't so easy to not pay for that. So also it depends on what deals the landlord has for certain utilities or providers and stuff like that.
Now, when do you get your utility bill from the landlord? That is a very open-ended question because it depends on the companies that provide the meter readings, like the analysis, as well as your landlord. Usually a utility bill spans a calendar year. And by law, you need to receive the utility bill maximum 12 months after the measuring period ends. So usually by the end of the next year, the following year. So depending when you move into a new place, it can take some time for you to understand how much your rent actually will be. In our case, we moved into this apartment the 1st of January officially, so we still don't know how much we have been paying for the first half of the winter. We will only find out the cost for this year probably next year, September, because that is when our other tenants this year got the utility bill. In our previous apartment last year, we got the utility bill in May this year, so it took 5 months longer.
And I would say also another interesting thing is when we left the old apartment, the landlord said, I'm going to hold on to your deposit, wait for the Nebenkostenabrechnung so I can take that money from the deposit and give you the difference.
Which, mind you, there was nothing to take, but we got money back. But still, they use that sometimes also as an argument to hold on, like Jen said. And in our case, it took 5 months to get the deposit back because it took 5 months for the utility bill to arrive.
Now here we would like to give you an example of how to read a utility bill. And for that we have our expert, Yvonne.
Well, just like any other bureaucratic document or like the Payslip where we did a video on explaining the little abbreviations and everything, the utility bill can look quite complex. So let's look at the ones from the last 2 years from us and explain what means what. So by law, the utility bill needs to include certain aspects. So first of all, it needs to include the billing period, which we have here. Then it also needs to include your portion of the total costs of the house, which we have here. Ihr Anteil an den Gesamtkosten. That's what it is. Then it needs to show the amount of your prepayments through your monthly rent, which we have here. Ihre Vorauszahlung means your prepayments. And then it of course needs to show the amount of the additional payments. Either you get money back, which would be a refund, Rückzahlung or Guthaben, or if you have to pay extra money, a Nachzahlung. In our case, in this example here, we had to pay extra money, a whopping 86 euros and 12 cents for the entire year. If we jump into the year thereafter, you can see here that in this year, we actually got a refund, a Guthaben of 148 euros and 47 cents. So this is how you can tell whether you get money back or you have to pay money extra. When you look more closely at your utility bill, you can actually see the breakdown of all of the costs attributed to you. In our case here, we see the heating costs. And this is a very important place to look at to answer the question from the beginning of the video, whether the heating costs will be calculated all together and divided by the square meters of the tenants. So pretty much, is it worth it for saving on heating? And the answer is yes and no. In this case of the utility bill, you can see that there is a 40-60 split. 40% of all of the costs are basic costs, and they are literally distributed by square meters, which you can see here. Einheiten in our case means square meters. In our old place had 49 square meters. 60% are based on our actual consumption, which again is measured by units, Einheiten, but different kinds of units, and those are the units that are actually transmitted by the different radiators in the apartment. And this consumption is transmitted electronically by the different radiators.
Ah, that's what this white thing on the radiators is for.
Correct. It's actually called a Fühler, like a feeler of the radiator, and that is transmitted, in our case, electronically. There are some old ones that need manual reading.
Okay.
But yes. So in this case, only 60% we can actually impact by how much you're heating or not. The other 40% are distributed equally. In our new apartment, the rental contract, and you can find this in your rental contract, states a 70-30 split. So it really depends on what is listed in your rental contract on how much you can impact your cost by saving on heating or not.
Yeah, but additional to that, I would say even if you don't turn your heaters at all, you would still need to pay a bill based on the consumption of the other tenants in this 40%, right?
Well, not the consumption per se, but just like the maintenance cost of, for example, the heater running in the basement and the maintenance of the heater and all of that. It's more than just consumption that costs the heating system.
However, that's not necessarily a good idea to have all the heaters off just to save on cost, because another problem can happen, and that is growing mold. And we talk about this in detail on how to take care of your heating system and everything in a video that's here on Yvonne's head.
Next up in our utility, we have the water, and that is specifically cold water. So the cold water that's consumed and also the cold water that's being drained, because the heating of the water either runs through electricity or through the heating cost itself as well. And then we actually have the Betriebskosten that we referred to so often in this video. And here now we have listed all of the different things we earlier mentioned what can be part of the utility bill, like the cleaning of the staircase, which is this one here, the general electricity, the insurance for the building, the property tax, the liability insurance for the building, the TV cable. Look, we actually paid 180 euros almost every year for TV cable that we never really used, but there's no way of getting out of it.
On top of the GEC, I must add.
Then there is here the garbage removal and the street cleaning, for example, in our bill. Then next up here, we actually can see per radiator the consumption that we use on the heaters. So this is really just for geeks amongst you that want to know all of the little details, but it shows you really the radiator consumption on how you turn it on. And W stands for living room, Wohnzimmer, S for Schlafzimmer, so the bedroom, and B for bath, so the bathroom.
Wow, I did not know this was so detailed.
Mm-hmm. And then another thing the utility bill must include is the total cost of the entire building. And that is what you have here on the next page. I'm not going to go into detail because it's just a repetition of what I just talked about, just for everyone, so all tenants. And you see here the big cost factor that is for the entire house.
I have a question. Is that amount divided by everyone?
That depends on the contract, but also on what type of cost we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So let's give that example now. That's a very good question, because again, to answer the Smoothler question in the beginning, it depends whether it's split, and whether it's split by square meter, by unit, or by consumption. So how can we tell if something is split by consumption, square meters, or per tenant, per household in the building? In our utility bill, we see here the heating cost, the word Verbrauch. And Verbrauch means consumption. So the heating costs, at least in this case 60%, are based on consumption. Then we have a bunch of examples. Everywhere where you see the 49 here, that is the square meters the apartment had. There, the cut or the distribution is based on square meters of the apartment. And then here we have a 1, and that is what I just mentioned before, the TV cost, because the TV costs are split by household. So regardless of consumption, regardless of square meters, but by household in the entire apartment building.
Oh, okay. That is super interesting. So now the question is, if I'm paying too much or too little, can I adjust that payment per month, or how does that work?
So I would say if you're paying too much, you can typically not reduce your rent. I would say that needs to be discussed with the landlord, and I would say they usually wouldn't allow that.
Okay.
However, if you are paying too little, let's say one year you receive a super high bill because there have been some changes in the political game, costs increased, and you would like to avoid to having several hundred euros, for example, of extra payment again in the following year. Happened to us.
Yes.
And in this case, I just really increased manually the rent by 50 euros per month, because that was kind of like, if we divided the extra payment, divided by 12, was 50 euros. To prevent, for me, I prefer to pay 50 euros extra each month instead of paying, let's say, 600 euros extra once a year.
At the end of the year.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that I just did. I didn't ask the landlord or anything, because, I mean, mind you, they're getting more money anyways. And there were also no complaint from their side. So we just went ahead and did that. But I did write, I think, an email to the landlord informing them that it is a prepayment, and for them to know why there's suddenly more money in the
bank account
transfer. As a quick side tip, this bill that you get, the utility bill, keep that in your documents. Don't just throw it away, because it is also very handy to have accessible when you do your tax declaration at the end of the year. If you want to know more about it, you can watch this video. But it is a good idea to hand this to your tax consultant or upload it to the tax software, whichever way you do a tax declaration. as some of the costs can be actually tax deductible.
Now let's talk about electricity. Electricity is not part of the Nebenkosten. That has to be something that you pay additional. The system of how you pay electricity actually is exactly the same as you pay the Nebenkosten. It's the same thing. You pay a monthly fee based on an estimate, and at the end of the year, you get the invoice, and then you see your real consumption, and if you pay too much, you get money back, and if you pay too little, you need to pay more.
Correct. The difference is that if you pay either way. However, you are under or overpaying, if there's a big difference, the electricity company, if you stay with them for another year, they would adjust the prepayment accordingly by themselves and a lot faster. Usually it just takes a month or two to get that invoice than the landlords take. So that is just a lot more streamlined. In our case, we changed electricity providers to Ostrom, the only English-speaking provider out there, in July last year. And the cool thing about Ostrom is that it's all digital. I'm actually tracking. Thanks to Simple Germany, I've become a bit of a nerd and a geek on tracking things and understanding how everything works, tracking our consumption weekly. And because of that, I can see that our consumption now, winter, for example, is a lot higher than I thought. Yeah, or because we didn't have the summer to balance it out, I can manually, with a tap of a button, increase our monthly payment. So I know already I won't have a big bill at the end of the year. So I actually like that very much. I've never had that much transparency in our electricity before.
Yeah, I was going to say, before it was really a black box because it was a meter that was read once a year and you couldn't really tell how much it was, right? If you want to learn more about electricity and how to choose the best provider for you, then make sure to watch our video here on the left. Until next time, cheers! I feel there are no bloopers.
And it is the typical utility,
It's not typical. Yeah. And stop saying typical so much.
See, that's why I just stopped.
We should have a typical counter for it.
Typically a utility, you can typically not reduce your rent.